Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to my channel, I Hate Rock Music. And I decided to do a series of what's called rural rock bands. And that's bands that kind of have a little blues to them, a little folk, a little country, a little rock, a little jazz. A really interesting subgenre of, 60s and 70s rock. There's a lot more of them around than a lot of people think about because a lot of them are fairly obscure. But I've grown to really love that style. Not so much in the actual late 60s and early 70s. I definitely liked the real hard rock back then, and then got into progressive, and of course later on got into punk and all that stuff. But over the years, just because I craved that late 60s, early 70s sound, I fully embraced a lot of these rural rock bands, and some of those kind of bands are pretty well noted. Pure Prairie League, um, Poco, the Eagles to a certain extent. There's a certain amount of Allman Brothers that could be classified as rural rock, but a really interesting subgenre. And one of the bands that does that that's really dear to my heart is called Brethren. And they came out of New York City, existed between 1970 and 1972. And it was one of the first albums I bought in cutouts. I think I probably bought it in 1971. And I didn't I wasn't in a position really to judge a lot of what records would sound like by the cover because I hadn't had much experience. But the fact that they were all posed around a barn on their first album should have tipped me off that it was going to be more rural rock. But I think the price was right. I think it was about 50 cents or something like that. So let's get into the band. Mike Garson on keyboards, Rick Marotta on drums, Tom Cosgrove on vocals and guitar, and Stu Woods on bass. And then Dr. John actually wrote the liner notes and plays keyboards on the album. And I didn't have any idea who these guys were. And for years, I've really enjoyed these Brethren records before I actually found out where a lot of these people ended up. But I'll get into that in a minute. So we have Brethren put out two albums, in 1970, just the album Brethren, and then 1971, Moment of Truth on the obscure Tiffany label. And they recorded the album at Gold Star Studios, which a lot of bands around that period used that studio. But one of the things that's interesting is it's a Mike Appel production. And Mike Appel was one of the people that worked with Sir Lord Baltimore and actually helped name Sir Lord Baltimore, and then also ended up working with Bruce Springsteen. So there's one notable person. And so the album is filled out with the bass, vocals, drums, and keyboards, and then Dr. John also on keyboards. But they also had the Blossoms, female black backup singers, the Brecker brothers on keys, and Rusty Young from Poco on steel guitar. So this ends up being a super group, and I had no idea after all these years that Brethren were kind of a super group. And in fact, let's kind of get into where they went. A lot of members of the band ended up playing on the experimental Annette Peacock's "I'm the One," and then Mike Garson, of course, is very famous for playing with Bowie in the early '70s after he left Brethren, and he also worked on the Mick Ronson solo records. So wow, crazy to find that out after all these years. And then Rick Marotta, the drummer, ended up working with John Lennon, Aretha Franklin, Paul Simon, Stevie Nicks, Steely Dan, and a whole bunch of others. And Tom Cosgrove, the vocalist and guitarist, ended up working with Al Cooper, Todd Rundgren, and a whole bunch of other popular, famous artists as well. And then Stu Woods, bass player, ended up playing with Jim Croce, Janis Ian, Tony Orlando, Barry Manilow, and a whole bunch of other artists. So it's really great to see a band like this that I grew up with and is fairly obscure, and find out that all of them had great success moving forward. So a nice happy ending to this one. And I think that normally I would kind of go through the songs and talk about various songs and the songwriting and stuff like that. But I'm going to skip it this time because I think both these albums are great. I know that I've read reviews that aren't that kind to them and think they're more pedestrian, but I think they're one of the best obscure bands that I've heard. They really kind of had it all going on. They check all the boxes. The musicianship is top notch. The singing's great. All the songs are great, and I can rarely say that about a lot of obscure albums where every song is really excellent. And if you really want to know what the band's made of, there's an instrumental called Success Brand Oil that just shows off everything they're capable of. The drummer, Rick Marotta, is just killer, and the guitar playing, and the bass playing are all just excellent, and the keyboards as well. So, um, in the middle of all the rural rock they do, it's great to have this one slamming instrumental. It really shows off everything they can do because everything else that they do on their two albums is definitely serving the song. There's not a lot of flashiness or grandstanding or anything like that. But right off the bat, they're just so listenable. The musicianship is great, the singing is great, and the songwriting is great. And it's everything you'd want from a rural rock album. And thankfully, there's two of them. And the second one's a little more finished, a little more full. It definitely has a lot more layers. And but I have a soft spot for that first one because, like I mentioned, it's one of the first cutouts I ever bought, buying a record that I'd never heard and being really tickled with it. I also like that first album because it's a little more stark, so you really get to hear what everybody's made of. But as usual, I've got the links below, and if you like that kind of rural rock thing, I know a lot of records I talk about are real hard rock records or proto metal and things like that. But as I mentioned, I'm going to do a little run on rural rock bands. So if you like that kind of thing, and if you like Poco and the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band and the Eagles and things like that, you really have to check out Brethren. They're definitely one of the best and kind of unusual for a lot of the videos I do. Brethren is definitely a first tier band. They don't have that much visibility, but they're not a third tier band. They're not a second tier band. They're definitely a first tier band that could have been really huge, probably if they'd gotten on another label or something like that. But and also weird that they do this rural rock and they came out of New York City. So anyway, links below. Check them out, Brethren. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching my channel.